The warning you are hearing is not rooted in anger, frustration, or disappointment. It is rooted in mercy. There is a deep misunderstanding many people carry that when God warns, it means he is fed up. In truth, a warning is often the clearest sign that he still cares. Silence would be far more dangerous. Silence would mean permission. But when God speaks strongly, it is because love is still fighting for you. Mercy does not always sound gentle. Sometimes mercy raises its voice. Sometimes mercy interrupts your routine, unsettles your comfort, and confronts what you've been avoiding. This warning is not meant to scare you away from God. It is meant to pull you back into alignment with him. It is heaven's refusal to let you drift any further without intervention. If God were angry, he would not warn you. He would let you continue. The fact that you are being corrected, stirred, and challenged is proof that you are still within reach of grace. Discipline is not rejection. Correction is not condemnation. These are signs of relationship, not abandonment. Many people mistake consequence for cruelty, but consequences are often the final guardrails of mercy. God sees what lies ahead on the path you are walking. He sees the emotional damage, the spiritual erosion, the broken relationships, the loss of peace that will eventually surface if nothing changes. You only see today. He sees the end. That is why the warning comes before the collapse. This warning is not about punishment. It is about protection. Protection from becoming someone you were never meant to be. Protection from losing sensitivity to conviction. Protection from slowly normalizing what once bothered your spirit. God intervenes not when things are already destroyed, but when there is still time to turn around. Mercy does not always remove the storm. Sometimes it warns you before you sail into it. It tells you when to stop, when to turn, when to let go. Ignoring that warning does not make God harsh. It simply means you chose to move forward without his covering. There is also urgency in mercy. Love understands timing. Love knows that delay can be just as dangerous as rebellion. That is why this warning feels weighty. It is not because God is impatient, but because the window for easy correction is closing. What could have been fixed with obedience may soon require pain to correct. God's desire has always been restoration, not destruction, alignment, not loss, growth, not punishment. Even now, his heart is not set on what you've done wrong, but on what you could still become if you respond. The warning is not about your past. It is about your future. Many people assume that because God is loving, he will endlessly excuse disobedience. Love does not excuse what destroys you. Love confronts it. Love draws a line and says, you cannot keep going this way and expect life. That line is mercy. If you feel unsettled, exposed, or uncomfortable, it is not because you are under attack. It is because you are being awakened. Mercy often feels like disruption before it feels like relief. But on the other side of obedience, peace returns. This warning is proof that God has not given up on you. It is evidence that your destiny still matters, your calling is still intact, and your life is still worth redirecting. Anger walks away. Mercy speaks one more time. From the very beginning, the calling on your life was never about merely getting through hardship. Survival is what do when you believe there is no alternative. Transformation is what happens when you realize you were created for more. Many have learned how to endure pain, adapt to dysfunction, and normalize struggle, but endurance was never the destination. It was only meant to carry you until change became possible. You were not chosen to live in constant recovery mode, always healing but never whole, always coping but never conquering. There is a difference between being resilient and being restored. Resilience keeps you standing. Restoration makes you new. God did not invest purpose, gifts, and vision into you just so you could say you survived another season. When survival becomes the goal, growth quietly stops. You start measuring life by how little damage you take instead of how much purpose you fulfill. You become proud of getting through it while ignoring the fact that nothing is actually changing. Cycles repeat, patterns return, and the same lessons keep resurfacing because transformation was postponed in favor of comfort. Transformation demands honesty. It requires you to confront not just what happened to you, but what you have become because of it. Survival protects the wound, transformation heals it. Survival builds habits around pain, transformation removes the source. God's intention was never to make you tougher so you could handle brokenness better. It was to make you whole so brokenness would no longer define you. There are people who pray for relief but resist change. They want God to adjust the environment while leaving the mindset untouched. But environments change only temporarily. Mindsets shape futures. Transformation begins internally long before circumstances shift externally. That is why merely surviving feels exhausting. You are carrying internal battles that were meant to be resolved, not managed. Being chosen does not mean you will face less pressure. It means you are expected to grow through it. Pressure was meant to refine you, not trap you. But refinement only works when you allow the process to complete. When you interrupt it by retreating into survival mode, you delay the outcome God intended. You cannot step into authority while remaining in survival. Authority comes from alignment, not endurance. It flows from clarity, not constant crisis management. God's desire was never for you to be spiritually alert, but emotionally stuck, anointed, but afraid, aware, but unchanged. Transformation often requires letting go of the identity you formed while surviving. The version of you that learned to distrust, withdraw, numb emotions, or control outcomes may have helped you once, but it cannot lead you forward. God is not dismissing what you endured. He is inviting you to outgrow it. Survival asks, how do I get through this? Transformation asks, who am I becoming through this? That question changes everything. It shifts your focus from escaping pain to developing purpose. It moves you from reacting to life to leading it. It forces you to stop asking why things keep happening and start asking what needs to change within you so the pattern can end. You were never meant to build a life around coping mechanisms. You were meant to build a life around calling. That requires courage, the courage to leave familiar pain for unfamiliar freedom, to release old defenses, and to trust that what God is forming in you is stronger than what you've been protecting yourself from. Transformation is not comfortable, but it is intentional. Survival keeps you alive. Transformation makes you effective. And effectiveness is what your calling requires. Surrender is often misunderstood as weakness, loss, or defeat, but in reality, it is the doorway to strength, clarity, and peace. Immediate surrender is not about giving up who you are. It is about releasing control over what was never meant to be carried alone. When God calls for surrender, He is not trying to diminish you. He is trying to realign you with what you were created to become. Many delay surrender because they associate it with fear. Fear of losing control, fear of uncertainty, fear of letting go of familiar patterns, even when those patterns are exhausting. But what feels safe is often what is keeping you stuck. Surrender challenges the illusion that you can manage your life better than the one who sees the whole picture. Immediate surrender matters because timing matters. Obedience delayed often requires greater cost later. What could have been released gently must eventually be removed forcefully. Surrender now protects you from unnecessary pain later. It allows correction without destruction. Surrender restores peace because it ends internal conflict. Much of the exhaustion people feel is not from external pressure, but from internal resistance. The spirit knows what to do, but the will resists. This tension drains energy, clarity, and joy. When surrender happens, alignment follows and peace returns naturally. Power flows from alignment, not effort. Many try to generate strength through discipline, motivation, or intensity, but true power is accessed through obedience. When you surrender, you stop striving to force outcomes and start cooperating with divine direction. This shift replaces anxiety with confidence and confusion with clarity. Surrender also unlocks authority. Authority is not loudness or control. It is quiet confidence rooted in alignment. When you surrender, you step out of reaction mode and into intentional living. Decisions become clearer, boundaries become firmer, distractions lose their grip. Immediate surrender interrupts cycles. Cycles persist because resistance feeds them. When surrender happens, the cycle loses its power. Patterns that repeated for years can break in moments, not because circumstances changed, but because alignment did. Many are waiting for peace before they surrender, but peace follows surrender. It does not precede it. Waiting to feel ready is another form of delay. Readiness comes after obedience, not before it. Surrender also restores identity. When control is released, you stop defining yourself by survival, fear, or past failure. You begin to see yourself through purpose rather than pain. This shift transforms how you respond to challenges and how you carry responsibility. There is a version of you that only appears after surrender, a calmer version, a clearer version, a more focused version. This version does not panic easily, does not compromise quickly, and does not chase validation. It moves with intention rather than urgency. Surrender does not remove challenges, but it changes how you face them. You stop fighting alone. You stop carrying weight that was never assigned to you. You move from striving to trusting, from reacting to responding. Immediate surrender is not the end. It is the beginning of peace that stays, power that flows naturally, and destiny that unfolds without resistance. There is a subtle danger that comes with spiritual gifting, and it is the illusion that ability can replace obedience. When someone is gifted, talented, or anointed, it becomes easy to assume that results are proof of alignment. But gifting can function even when obedience is compromised. This is why being gifted but disobedient is one of the most dangerous spiritual conditions to exist in. Gifts are given freely, but alignment is maintained intentionally. Ability can open doors that character was meant to keep open. When obedience weakens, gifting continues to operate for a time, creating confusion. You still see impact, still receive affirmation, still experience moments of success, and this convinces you that nothing is wrong. But beneath the surface, erosion has already begun. Disobedience does not immediately remove gifting, it drains authority. You may still function, but you no longer flow. What once felt effortless now feels heavy. What once brought joy now produces exhaustion. You begin to work harder for results that once came naturally. This is the quiet cost of misalignment. Being gifted but disobedient often leads to self-reliance. Instead of depending on guidance, you begin to depend on experience. Instead of listening closely, you lean on familiarity. This shift is dangerous because it replaces humility with confidence and conviction with competence. Over time, the gap between what you are capable of and what you are aligned with widens. You know how to perform, but you struggle to remain present. You know how to speak, but you no longer listen. You know how to lead, but you no longer follow instruction. This disconnect creates internal tension that manifests as burnout, frustration, and emptiness. One of the most sobering realities is that disobedience rarely shuts things down immediately. Instead, it allows you to keep going just long enough to drift further off course. This is not approval, it is allowance. And allowance is far more dangerous than resistance. Eventually, God may step back, not in anger, but in respect for your choice. He allows you to experience the limits of your own strength. This is not abandonment, it is exposure. Exposure reveals that gifting without guidance cannot sustain destiny. When God steps back, it does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like momentum without peace, success without satisfaction, progress without fulfillment. You achieve things, but nothing feels settled. You gain recognition, but lose clarity. This is the weight of being gifted, but disconnected. Obedience keeps gifting aligned with purpose. Without it, gifting becomes a tool for self-preservation rather than transformation. You begin to use what you were given to maintain comfort instead of fulfill calling. The danger is not losing the gift. The danger is losing direction while still appearing effective. Others may applaud you while your spirit feels unsettled. You may look successful while feeling spiritually dry. Correction is still possible, but it requires humility. It requires acknowledging that gifting does not excuse resistance. That impact does not replace alignment. That talent does not override instruction. The most powerful position is not being gifted and busy, it is being obedient and aligned. Because when obedience and gifting move together, effort decreases and impact multiplies. Growth is never accidental and elevation is never random. Every new level demands a decision, and that decision often comes in the form of separation, not because God enjoys removing things, but because advancement requires space. You cannot carry everything forward and still move upward. Some things that were permitted in one season become obstacles in the next. Many people struggle with elevation because they try to bring old attachments into new assignments, old habits, old mindsets, old relationships, and old comforts are carried forward under the assumption that they will somehow adjust. But what once felt familiar begins to feel heavy. The burden is not the blessing, it is the baggage. Separation is not always about cutting people off. Sometimes it is about cutting influence out. Influence shapes thought patterns, values, and decisions. When your environment consistently pulls you back toward who you were, it becomes difficult to grow into who you are meant to become. Elevation requires alignment, and alignment requires discernment. There are connections that are not sinful, but are still limiting. There are conversations that are not evil, but are still draining. There are routines that are not destructive, but are still distracting. Growth often demands the courage to walk away from what is merely familiar in order to step into what is truly fruitful. Separation feels painful because it exposes attachment. It reveals where identity has been tied to comfort rather than calling. Letting go threatens the false security built around people, places, and patterns that once helped you cope. But coping is not the same as becoming. Every level of elevation introduces new responsibility. That responsibility requires clarity, focus, and strength. Carrying old weight into new responsibility produces exhaustion, confusion, and frustration. You begin to wonder why growth feels so difficult when the problem is not the calling, it is the clutter. God often removes things not as punishment, but as preparation. What feels like loss is sometimes protection in disguise. What feels like loneliness is sometimes recalibration. Silence can be strategic. Distance can be divine. Many resist separation because they fear isolation, but separation is not abandonment. It is refinement. It is the process of narrowing your focus so your impact can widen. You are not being reduced. You are being positioned. The fear of separation often comes from misunderstanding value. You think letting go means erasing history, but it does not. It honors the season without allowing it to define the future. Gratitude does not require permanence. Elevation also exposes internal separation. Old thought patterns must be challenged. Old narratives about yourself must be rewritten. Growth demands internal distancing from fear, doubt, and insecurity that once felt protective but now feel restrictive. Without separation, growth becomes cosmetic. You look changed, but you function the same. You speak differently, but you respond the same. True elevation produces inner and outer transformation, and that requires leaving behind what no longer aligns. Separation clarifies purpose. When distractions are removed, direction sharpens. When noise fades, discernment strengthens. When excess is stripped away, focus emerges. What you release determines how high you rise. Not everything you love can follow you. Not everything you survived should stay with you. Elevation is not about gaining more. It is about carrying less so you can go further. There is a dangerous lie hidden inside delay, and it is the belief that waiting costs nothing. Many people assume that as long as they are not actively rebelling, postponing obedience is harmless. But delay is never neutral. It is a decision that quietly shapes outcomes, hardens habits, and redirects futures without ever announcing itself. Every time instruction is postponed, something shifts internally. Sensitivity dulls. Conviction becomes easier to ignore. What once felt urgent begins to feel optional. The voice that challenged you grows quieter, not because it stopped speaking, but because you trained yourself not to respond. Over time, delay teaches the heart to negotiate with truth instead of submitting to it. Disobedience often begins as hesitation. It rarely announces itself boldly. It hides behind phrases like later, when things settle down, or after this season. These words sound responsible, but they mask resistance. Delay creates the illusion of control while slowly surrendering authority over your life. Time does not pause while you decide. While you hesitate, patterns deepen. While you wait, habits strengthen. While you postpone change, consequences prepare quietly in the background. What could have been resolved with a simple act of obedience now requires far more effort, pain, or loss to correct. Delayed obedience also distorts perspective. You begin to believe that because nothing collapsed immediately, the warning was exaggerated. You mistake mercy for approval and patience for permission. But patience is not agreement. God's silence after a warning is not endorsement, it is restraint. There is a point where repeated delay no longer feels like a choice. It feels like being stuck. What once felt like freedom becomes limitation. You start to feel trapped by the very things you thought you could manage. This is how delay slowly turns into bondage. The most sobering reality is that delay reshapes destiny without your awareness. You may still be praying, still believing, still declaring promises, yet walking in the opposite direction of their fulfillment. Direction matters more than intention. Good intentions cannot override consistent misalignment. Delay also creates emotional fatigue. You feel tired without knowing why. You sense heaviness even in moments that should feel light. This is the weight of unresolved obedience. The Spirit was designed to move in alignment, not constant internal conflict. Over time, delayed obedience produces a numbness that is far more dangerous than fear. Fear at least acknowledges risk. Numbness accepts stagnation. When urgency fades, complacency settles in and spiritual alertness weakens. God's warnings carry timing because timing carries protection. Responding early avoids unnecessary damage. Responding late multiplies difficulty. What mercy could have prevented, pain now must correct. The urgency you feel is not pressure, it is guidance. It is the awareness that the window for easy correction is closing. That does not mean hope is gone, but it does mean the cost of change is increasing. Every delay is shaping who you become. You are either becoming more responsive or more resistant, more aligned or more distant. There is no pause button in spiritual growth, only movement forward or drift backward. Delayed obedience does not cancel destiny, but it complicates it. It adds detours that were never necessary. It introduces struggles that obedience would have bypassed. This moment matters more than you realize. What you choose to do now will echo longer than what you intend to do later.